my colleagues on the program team, Laney McGlohon and Laura Woodford, to talk with you about customizing the public interface of ArchivesSpace. Laney and Laura, are you there?
I am getting it started now.
Excellent.
How does that look?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Hello. I'm Laney McGlohon. I'm the technical lead for ArchivesSpace. And sorry, it's kind of late for me too, so I'm a little tired. But I'm going to talk to you with Laura Woodford, who is our junior developer for ArchivesSpace, about customizing the public user interface, some simple how-tos. Oops, helps if I'm in the right. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to, hold on, sorry, I hit too many buttons. All right, so here's the agenda. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction, talk to you about customizing using configuration settings, and I've got some examples for that. I'm going to talk about customizing using plugins and talk about the plugin architecture and how all that kind of stuff works with some examples, and then there'll be some resources at the end. So, above all, you don't need to be an expert developer to custom the public user interface for ArchivesSpace. We're going to give you some examples here. There are a lot on the web, plus there's a wonderful community of people, including the ArchivesSpace program team, who are happy to help. You will need the help of your system administrator or someone else to access your server for the changes to take effect, and I'll talk about that as I talk through some of the examples. So I'm going to talk about two mechanisms you can use to configure the public user interface. One of them is configuration variables, and those are done inside the config.rb file, which I will explain in a little bit, and the plugin mechanism. All of the code examples from this presentation can be found in the TechDocs GitHub repository, and the link is here. It also includes this PowerPoint presentation as well. So here goes. All right, configuration settings. So in all ArchivesSpace releases, there's a configuration file in the config directory, and that file is called config.rb. There are a bunch of configuration settings in this file, and some of them can be used to customize the public user interface. A couple of things to note about configuration settings. When you change the values in the config.rb file, you need to make sure that you remove the pound signs that are at the beginning of the lines that you modify, so that the system knows to take those configuration changes. And most of the following examples, I'm going to give you the default values that come right out of the box, and show you some changes that I make and the results of those changes. Also, you need to remember, after you save the changes to the config file, you have to restart ArchivesSpace. So we have lots of examples that I'm going to go through. You'll note that these have letters at the beginning in the config.rb file that's included in the GitHub repository I mentioned earlier. If you search for example space and the letter name, it'll actually take you directly to the changes that I'm describing in this presentation, so that you don't have to hunt around too much to find them. So we're going to talk about how to change links on the navigation toolbar, how to enable and disable badges and counts that appear on the repository page, change the number of search results per page, the number of characters to truncate before showing the see more link, how you change the feedback link, enable and disable citations, the print functionality, and the display of linked deaccessions. Oops. All right. So to change the links on the navigation toolbar, there are 8 different links on the navigation toolbar, and in this slide I show you the different parameters that you would need to change in the config file if you wanted to change any of these. You'll note that it starts with app config, and all of the parameters I'm going to talk about start with app config inside the file. And so for the navigation toolbar links, There's one for the repositories, resources, digital objects, accession, subjects, agents, classifications, and then the search tab, which is the magnifying glass on the far right side of the default toolbar. So what I've got is an example of what the toolbar looks like straight out of the box. And then if, say, for example, I wanted to remove the unprocessed material link, what I would do is I would set the PUI hide accessions parameter equal to true. And if you'll note, the unprocessed material link has disappeared from the nav toolbar. And you can do that for any of the other ones you'd like to remove as well. So to enable and disable the counts and badges that appear on the repository page, it's going to look a lot like what I just talked about. There's the PUI hide, and that is the section that's used to hide or display things on the PUI. There's several badges, and out of the box, they're all set. The hide functionality is set to be false. So if you wanted to, let me show you some examples. So the default counts and badges that come straight out of the box are the first example up there. If you didn't like the counts that are included in those badges, what you can do is you can set the PUI hide counts equal to true, and that would actually remove the counts from the badges themselves. So you can see that in the middle example. And then the final example is my thing about disabling unprocessed materials badge, kind of in parallel to the navigation toolbar hiding. And so basically, if you set the accession badge parameter equal to true, that badge will disappear from the repository page. Next, I'm going to show you how to change the number of search results per page. The variable that's in the config file is called PUI_search_results_page_size. Hopefully we name these things in such a way that it's obvious what they do. And the default out of the box is 10. So I have examples here. I had 26 resource records in my example that I was using. And so if the results page size is 10, you end up with 3 different pages, 1 to 10, 11 to 20, and then 21 to 26. So I changed the search results page size to 20, and I ended up with 2 pages, one with 1 to 20 and the other one with 21 to 26. You can play around with that. It just depends on your own institution and how many things you would like to show up on your results page. Next, to change the number of characters to truncate before showing the see more link, there's a variable called PUI_readmore_max_characters. This just got added in, I do believe, in either the last release or the release before. So this is a new functionality that got put in. The default is 450, and that's what it was before. And you'll see how big that is. And so what I did was I changed it to be 250, and you'll see that the amount of text it shows is much smaller. Next, to change the feedback link, at the bottom right-hand corner of the PUI is a feedback link. It is the parameter feedback_URL that's in the config file, and the default is back to the ArchivesSpace website. It's archivespace.org/feedback. So if you'd like to change that to be so the feedback will come directly to you at your institution, what you need to do is to add a web accessible URL there in the variable, and that should make it so that when people click on that, it will actually go to wherever you've directed it to. If you'd like to remove the feedback link completely, what you can do is you can set the feedback URL equal to an empty string, which is basically a double quote, no space, double quote. Next, I'm going to talk about a couple of page actions. One's called citations, the other one is print. For citations, there is a variable called PUI underscore page underscore actions underscore cite. The default out of the box is enable or true. And what this does, if you would like to leave it enabled, it puts up a citation icon. And if you press that, you end up getting the citation that's shown there at the bottom of the slide, which people can then either close it or they can copy it to the clipboard and use that as a citation. To disable it, what you do is set this parameter equal to false. Likewise, there is a print page action, and the parameter is called PUI underscore page underscore actions underscore print. The default is enabled or true. And basically what happens is if you do leave this enabled, when folks press the print button, what will happen is a PDF will be generated and saved down to the person's hard drive. If you want to disable that, you just need to set this parameter equal to false. My last example in the configuration file is whether or not you want to display linked deaccessions in the PUI. There's a parameter called PUI underscore display underscore deaccessions. It is set to true, which means it's enabled by default. And you can see on the left-hand side that the linked deaccession is shown. On the right-hand side, I show what happens if you set it equal to false or disable it. And basically, the linked deaccession will not show in the public user interface. So that's it for my configuration examples. Just to go over the main points, it's in the config.rb file. You need to make sure that you remove all pound signs that are at the beginning of the line that you want to change so that it will be recognized that it needs to activate whatever change you've made. Save the config file and restart ArchivesSpace, and your configuration should you should be able to see that it has changed in your installation. Next, I'm going to talk about plugins. So plugins are basically a mechanism for folks to be able to customize ArchivesSpace by overriding or extending functions without changing the core code base. They're self-contained, so that makes it really easy for people to share this customization between ArchivesSpace instances and across institutions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the plugins directory structure. For release 252 that went out earlier this year, there are two automatically or default enabled plugins in the release, and there are 3 examples. The 2 that are enabled are the LCNAF, which I think you guys have been hearing about in earlier discussions over today. And then there's the local plugin directory that I will talk about a lot more in the next couple of slides. There are 3 examples. One of them is called Cat in a Box, and that gives you an idea of how you change controller locales and views. Right now you don't need to understand what goes in those. I'll give you an example of that. But it's just an example for you to play around with to see what happens. There's a New Relic plugin. New Relic is an application performance monitoring tool, and there's this is a plugin that will, if you want to use New Relic, it actually has it's a cost. There's a cost to that. If you want to use that, this is a plugin that shows you how you can use that on your local site. There's also a RefID rules plugin, and this overrides the default auto-generator for component RefIDs. So these are pretty good examples for you to look at to see where code got placed, to give you an idea of what you might need to do if you want to create your own plugin. So I talked about the local directory. The plugins local directory is a special directory for making customizations without creating a whole new plugin. I'm going to show you a lot of examples of how you can put stuff in here without having to generate your own plugin, and I'll give you one example of a completely fleshed out plugin. Out of the box, it's pretty much an empty directory, so you're probably going to need to be able to add directories depending on the types of changes you're going to make. Something that's very important to understand about plugins is the directory structure is extremely important. If you don't follow it, the changes won't work as expected because the system won't be able to find the code it needs. And I'll talk a little bit about the directory structure and how you know where to put stuff. If you create your own plugin, the directory structure is really similar to the structure of the core code base. This shows an example of a plugin directory structure inside, because we're talking about plugins for the public user interface. Inside the plugins directory, you're going to have a level that is for your plugin specifically, and then inside there you'll have a public directory, and then you'll have different directories underneath. Again, it's really important to follow the correct directory structure in a plugin to make sure that it actually does what you expect. Okay, so steps to create a plugin. Basically what you got to do is identify what change you want to make and whether or not you're going to extend or override code that's existing in ArchivesSpace. Next, you need to determine whether where the implementation is in the code. There's a couple of ways of doing that. You can use the inspect functionality from a web page in an ArchivesSpace installation to give clues as to where the implementation happens in the core code. And there's also ways, if you look at other people's plugins, that might give you another idea of where the implementation might be. In most cases, to override the behavior rather than extend it, what you do is you match the path and the file name to the file that contains the behavior to be overridden. So basically it's going to look a lot like what the core code base looks like, with a little bit of a difference in there, and I'll explain that in a minute. There are a couple of files that are really special, that in which even when you match the path and the file name, the functionality will be extended. For example, the layout_head.html.erb file is one of those, and what happens is this file gets used at the top of every public PUI page delivered by ArchivesSpace. So you can imagine if you, by putting in this file in the correct spot, if it completely overrode what happened in ArchivesSpace, there could be some catastrophic results. So basically what happens is anything you put in there gets laid over what is currently in the core code base. And so it ends up being an extension and not an overridden thing. So now you've created a plugin. Now you need to enable it in order for the system to know it's there. So plugins are enabled by placing them in the ArchivesSpace installation plugins directory, like I said, and making modifications in the config.rb file that we've already talked about. There's a plugins parameter in there. And so, for example, if your plugin's name is my_plugin, what you would do is you would add that to the list that already exists in the config.rb file. If you look at in the config.rb file right now, it would already have local and lcnaf in it, and you just add that to the end of the list. One thing that you do need to understand is that the order that the plugins are listed in this list determines the order in which they are loaded by the application. So one thing you have to consider is if you're modifying the same file name in two different plugins, one's going to overlay the other, and you might not get the results you expect. So you need to think about what other plugins you have enabled and make sure that there won't be any conflicts between them. Like I said before, the local plugin directory is already enabled. Don't forget you need to uncomment the line when adding the new plugin to the list and restart ArchivesSpace. So I'm going to give you some examples. The first 5 actually are using the local plugin. The adding of a help page is an actual separate plugin. Changing of icons is also in the configuration file, and then I'll talk about how to use a community plugin. So say you wanted to change your colors across all pages. The style sheets for the public user interface, which we're going to control the colors, are in the public app asset style sheets ArchivesSpace directory in the core code base. So I'm going to show you how to change the colors in the header. So like I talked about earlier, the layout_head.html.erb file is what handles the header on each of the PUI pages. So the first thing I want to do is add an empty file with that name to the plugins local public views directory. Next, I want to create a CSS file with the customization I want and place that CSS file in the plugins local public assets directory. And then finally, what you need to do is you need to reference the CSS file in the layout_head.html.erb file that you created in the first step. So for example, if the CSS file name is custom_colors.css, the line in the layout_head file should look exactly like what I have there on the screen. And here's the result. So my custom color CSS file, the text is on the left. You'll see that I've changed the header background color to this lovely yellow, and I've also changed the hover color to that same yellow, and you'll see that where it shows my resource down a little bit lower on the right. Next thing you might want to do is customize your branding image. So in order to change your branding image, what you want to do is in the plugins local public directory, if there's not already the assets directory, go ahead and add that and put the new branding image in there. Then what you're going to want to do is modify the config.rb file by setting the PUI branding image parameter equal to the name of the branding image that you just put in the assets directory. So for example, if your file name is my_branding_image.png, you just set the PUI branding image equal to that. Make sure you uncomment the line, save the config file, and then restart ArchivesSpace. And here you can see that I've got a picture of my dog that I'm using for my branding image. One of the things some people would like to do would be to be able to move the branding image from the right to the left. In the previous slide, you saw it automatically is on the right-hand side. So basically, what I had to do is I had to figure out what file actually generates where the branding image is placed. And it is in the public app views shared _header.html.erb file. So in order for me to be able to change that, what I needed to do was I needed to add a file in the local plugins directory to make that change. But first what I did was I went and I looked at the contents of this file, and you'll note there are 2 divs that I have marked off. A actually is the branding title, and B is where the branding image gets set. So in order to switch the order in which those get displayed in the header, what I needed to do was to flip those 2 divs. So what I did was in the plugins local public view shared directory, I actually copied the header.html.erb file from the core code in there, and then I switched those 2 divs. I put B above A, and basically what that did is just change the order in which the file gets rendered. And here's what happened. So on the top one is with my dog again on the right hand side, and then after I put the file in and changed the divs and saved it, it flipped it to the left hand side. Granted, this is not the prettiest, and I would probably do more, but this at least gives you an idea of how you would flip those from one side to the other. Next, I wanted to show you how you could customize field and option labels. The field and option labels for the PUI can be found in the public config locales directory in the core code base. If you go in there and look in the directory, we actually have several different languages represented there. There's English, which is en.yml file, Spanish, which is the ES YAML file, French, which is FR, and Japanese, which is JA. So in order to change any of the labels or that are in this file, what you need to do is you need to create a corresponding YAML file in the plugins local public locales directory. So for example, if I wanted to make modifications to the English language locales file, I would add an empty en.yml file to the locals directory, and that's the path right there. Next, what you would do is you would find the text that you want to change inside that file. You want to add an entry to be modified, maintaining the hierarchy and spacing of the current YAML file structure, update the text, and save the file. One thing that's really important with YML or YAML files is the spacing is very important. You always have a 2-space indentation from the previous line to keep it in the current hierarchy. So, and you move 2 spaces at a time to move back up the hierarchy. So, for example, I was going to change the welcome message that comes on the main screen for the PUI, and in the en YAML file in the core code base, I found that that was in the welcome message label. So what I had to do was I had to take, because I was changing the English version, you start the file with en:, and then the next line was a level of hierarchy that was above the welcome message, and that's the brand. So then I put 2 spaces in brand and colon, and then 2 more spaces in welcome message, your text here. So I put that in my plugins local public locales en.yml file. I restarted ArchivesSpace, and you'll see that the welcome message that is out of the box at the top example has now been changed to your text here on the bottom. Next, I wanted to show how to add a home link to the navigation toolbar. We've messed a little bit around with the navigation toolbar with the configuration file, but that was mostly for removing. So this is going to show you how you can add a link to the navigation toolbar. Again, in the plugins local public directory, what you need to do is add a new file called plugin_init.rb and put this line of code in it. Basically what this line of code does is it adds a menu item, which is what the method is, and then it has 3 parameters that you need to add. The slash, that's the first parameter, takes it to the top level of the application, which is the home page. The middle parameter is what text you want the home link to have, and the last parameter is 0, means I want it at the very beginning of the nav toolbar line. If the file already exists, if you already have a plugin_init.rb in your local public directory, all you got to do is add this line to that file. So you'll see before what the nav toolbar looks like, and after it adds the home link at the beginning of the navigation toolbar. So that's it of the local plugins configurations that I wanted to talk about. And now I wanted to talk to you about how to add a help page and how to create a new plugin outside of the plugins local directory. So here goes. We're going to call this plugin help_page_PUI. So we need to create a plugins help_page_PUI directory. And I'm going to tell you what files I'm going to add, that I need to add for this, and then I'll explain the files in the next slide. So to begin with, I need to add a controller to manage the page. And so I need to add a public controllers directory inside my help page PUI plugins directory. and I'm going to call my controller help_controller.rb because it controls the help page. Next, I need to add a plugin init.rb file, and that just initializes everything, and that needs to be at the top level of the public directory inside my help page PUI plugins directory. The next thing I need to do is add what's called a routes file. And basically what this file does is it makes it so that the URL can be recognized and it will dispatch the right controller, which is the help controller that I'll show you in a minute. And that routes file needs to be at the same level in the directory structure as the plugin init.rb file, which is basically just inside the public directory inside the help page PUI directory. And last is the index.html.erb file, and this file is actually going to contain the help page text. And this is going to go in the help page PUI public views help directory in the plugin directory. So what are all these things for? Or what is in all of these things? How about that first? So the plugin init.rb file is going to tell it to look at the routes file that I'm going to talk about in a minute that we've just added to the plugin. And it's actually going to add the menu item help so that you can have people can actually click on the help page and get to it. The routes.rb file is basically going to give the plugin and the application the information about what happens when people click on the help menu item, the help link. And this command actually says when someone clicks on help, please call the index method inside the help controller. Now, the next file is the help controller file. This is a lot of Ruby stuff and Rails stuff in here, but basically what the help controller does is it defines the class that the help page controller is in, and it defines the index method that will make it so that the index.html.erb file will be called when someone clicks on the help link. And inside the index.html.erb file, it's a really basic one. Obviously, I wasn't going to flesh out a full help page here, but a couple of divs and text that says this is the help page. Also on this slide, I've included what the directory structure looks like from the plugins on down, and you'll see that I had to create a few directories, and you can see where the files ended up getting placed. So what does this do? So before, that's standard navigation toolbar. So afterwards, you'll see that there's a help link at the end of the toolbar. And when people click on it, it'll pull up the page that's at the bottom. You'll see that I'm still using the lovely yellow color change in there, but you can see that the text is there, which is, this is the help page. Oh, and there's one more thing I wanted to show you about the configuration file. A local plugin thing that you can do to change the icons that are in your ArchivesSpace installation. Basically, this is going to show you how you can change the icon image and the color for digital materials on all ArchivesSpace pages for the PUI. In ArchivesSpace version 2.5.2, we use something called Font Awesome, and it's version 4.7.0, and that is what we use for our icons. And there's a link to what icons are available in that version. Using the same process in the previous slides for changing colors, you can either add the CSS that I'm going to show you in a minute to the custom colors.css file, or you can create a new file, perhaps called custom icons.css. If you create a new file, place it in the plugin's local public assets directory and add this line to the layout_head.html ERB file that we've already placed in there for the custom colors. It looks an awful lot like the thing we did for the custom colors because it's basically the same pattern. But if you put that in there and you restart ArchivesSpace, it'll change your icons. So the text there in the left-hand corner is what my custom icons.css file looks like. What I did in order to figure out what icon I needed to change was I right-clicked on the digital materials icon that was in ArchivesSpace installation, and I was able to find the CSS that handled that image or icon, and it was called fa-file-image-o. And I decided what I wanted to do was change the icon to be a camera, and I wanted to change the color to black. And so if you go to that Font Awesome web page that I showed you, you can get the value that you would use for the content. That value is what's for this camera icon, and then the color set at all zeros is black. So on the repository page, basically what that did was it changed the icon, as you can see there on at the top right. And one thing to understand too is it changes the icon on all of the PUI pages. So everywhere that file image O icon was being used will now be a camera, and it'll also be black. All right, so my last thing is to tell you how to use community plugins. If you know of a community plugin that you think does what you need it to do, and you want to try to figure out where to put it in the plugin's architecture, what you need to do is to go to the GitHub repository for the plugin and determine and look at the directory structure that's in there, right? So you should be able to tell if it's something that goes into the local directory or if it's a plugin directory all on its own. If it goes into the local directory, what you need to do is just copy the files into the right directory structure in your local plugins directory. If it is a brand new plugin, then you'll need to put it at the same level as the local. So basically what you do is you either clone or download the GitHub repository with the plugin in it, and you put the files in the right spot in the plugins directory. If it's a new plugin, you don't forget to update the plugins parameter in the config file, and don't forget to remove the leading pound. Also, you should also look at it to see what files are changed if you have other plugins that are enabled, and make sure there's not going to be any conflict there. Once you figured out everything's good to go, save the config file, restart ArchivesSpace, and the plugin should be enabled at that point. If you have any questions, the best thing to do is to go straight to the person who wrote the plugin. They're the ones that are going to be able to help you the fastest. Or you can also submit questions to the member listserv or the Google group. If it's a community plugin that you're interested in, most likely someone else has tried it out as well. And if if you're having a problem or you're curious as about why something is happening, you can obviously put something out on the listserv or Google group and get information back on that. All right, so my last page is some resources. The first couple are links to pages that are in the Tech Docs repo, where all of our technical documentation is. There's some stuff on theming and more information on plugins. We have a wiki page that's called Plugins and Scripts, and that's a good place to go look at plugins that they try to aggregate plugins that people are using there. I've got a lot of links on here that are blog posts from different community members talking about some of their experiences with plugins and doing different things with ArchivesSpace. There's actually a YouTube video you can watch about how to do plugins that is pretty informative, and it steps you through the process. And last but not least, if you have an idea for a plugin or you need to make a change for your local installation and you think that it's something that the community, other people in the community might want or use, one possibility is turning an ArchivesSpace plugin into core code. So there's a wiki page, and there's a link to that at the bottom of the resources that gives you some ideas of what kinds of things you need to do in order to get your plugin into a core code. And that's it for me. If you have any questions, you can contact me or Laura, and I guess that's it.
Thank you, Laney. So we probably can take a few questions if anyone wants to ask any questions. All right, I'm going to throw it back to Jessica then.